You ever make a decision so reckless, so completely life-altering, that you look back and wonder, how the hell did I get here? Yeah, that's me right now. A few months ago, I had a stable job, a predictable life, and no reason to believe any of that would change. But then, one simple favor from my boss turned into something I never saw coming. Something that changed everything. Before I dive into this insane story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one. Now, let's start from the beginning. I never thought a simple favor would change my life forever. It started on an ordinary Tuesday, one of those days where you're just grinding through work, counting down the hours until you can go home. I had been working at Lancaster and Company for almost a decade. It was one of those jobs where you don't exactly hate it, but you don't love it either. It paid the bills, kept me in a routine, and at least gave me some stability. My boss, Graham Whitmore, was the kind of guy who demanded perfection but never really gave much in return. He was tough, intimidating, and made sure we all knew who was in charge. So when he called me into his office that day, I expected the usual, some lecture about efficiency or a new workload dumped on me. But instead, he just said, "Ethan, I need you to take my wife home." I didn't question it. You don't question Graham Whitmore. His wife, Marissa, had been at the office for some reason, and he was stuck in back-to-back meetings. I figured it was just a quick errand, no big deal. I had seen Marissa a few times before, beautiful, well-dressed. The kind of woman you'd expect a guy like Graham to be married to. But beyond that, I had no reason to think she was anything more than a distant figure in his world. That was about to change. When she slid into the passenger seat, I could tell right away that she carried herself differently outside the office. She wasn't just the boss's wife in that moment, there was something else there. Something softer, more human. I didn't know if it was the lack of the corporate setting or just the fact that she was alone, away from the polished, rehearsed version of herself I'd seen in passing. But whatever it was, it made the air feel heavier between us. The first few minutes of the ride were awkwardly silent. I didn't know what to say. I was just an employee. She was my boss's wife, there was no natural flow to this situation. She stared out the window, fingers lightly tapping against the car door, lost in thought. The radio played some soft instrumental track, barely noticeable over the hum of the engine. I thought about turning it off, but even that felt like too much. Then, out of nowhere, she spoke. Her voice was calm, almost detached, but there was something underneath it, a weight I couldn't quite place. Do you ever wonder if you're just existing? Like, not really living. Just going through the motions? I wasn't expecting that. People like me don't have deep philosophical conversations with women like her. I was used to small talk, weather, work, the usual. But this? This was different. It wasn't just a passing thought. It was a real question, the kind that came from something deeper. Something personal. I gave her some vague answer, something about how routine keeps things stable. It was the safe response. The kind of thing you say when you don't want to dig too deep into something that isn't your business. But she didn't even acknowledge it. Instead, she let out a soft breath. Almost like she was laughing at herself. I used to think stability was the most important thing, she said, her gaze still fixed on the blurred city lights outside. Graham gave me that. Security. A life where everything was taken care of. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling anything. That caught me off guard. People like her, rich, married to powerful men, living in perfect houses, weren't supposed to feel that way, right? At least, that's what I'd always assumed. But as she spoke, I realized she wasn't looking for pity. She wasn't even looking for advice. She just wanted someone to listen. The more she talked, the more I could hear it, the exhaustion in her voice. The kind that doesn't come from lack of sleep but from years of being unheard, unseen. She spoke about the expectations, the constant pressure to smile, to be poised. To be the perfect wife to a man who barely looked at her anymore. I think the worst part, she admitted, is that I don't even know when it started. When I became just another part of the house. Another thing in his life instead of a person. I don't even think he notices. Or if he does, maybe he just doesn't care. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? I wasn't some expert on relationships, and I sure as hell wasn't in a position to tell her how to fix her marriage. But as she sat there, speaking in that quiet, almost resigned tone, something about it made me feel angry. Not at her, but at the situation. At the idea that someone could be surrounded by so much yet feel so alone. For the first time since she got in the car. She turned to look at me. There was something raw in her expression, something unguarded. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't just a car ride. It wasn't just a favor. It was something else. Something I couldn't name yet, but it felt like stepping too close to the edge of something I wasn't supposed to touch. By the time I pulled up to her house, I wasn't looking at her the same way anymore. I told myself it was just a weird moment. Nothing more. But a few days later, she texted me. The message was casual. Nothing that should have raised a red flag. She said she wanted to talk. That was all. No urgency, no hidden implication. Just words on a screen that I could have ignored. But I didn't. I could have let it sit there, left it unanswered, let whatever that strange moment in the car had been fade into the background of our separate lives. But something in me, something restless and reckless, wanted to hear what she had to say. She asked if I wanted to grab coffee. It sounded harmless. People got coffee all the time, didn't they? So I agreed. And when I sat across from her at that small cafe, I convinced myself this was nothing more than two people killing time. But there was something different about her. The way she leaned in just slightly, the way her fingers traced the rim of her cup absent-mindedly, as if she was deep in thought about something she wasn't saying. It was like watching someone at the edge of a decision, uncertain whether to take the leap. Then she said it. The real reason she had asked me here. Graham was going out of town for a few days. She had time. Space. And she wanted to do something normal, as she put it. A movie, a walk, just an escape from the routine of her life. She framed it so simply. As if she were offering nothing more than an easy, light-hearted way to fill an empty evening. I knew better. I wasn't naive. I knew what this was, or at least what it could be. There was a reason she was asking me, and not a friend, not one of the dozens of other people in her social sphere. I could feel it in the way she looked at me, like she was waiting to see what I would do next, if I would be the one to break the tension or let it stretch between us indefinitely. I should have said no. I should have made up some excuse, drawn a line, walked away. But I didn't. Instead, I convinced myself it was nothing. That this wasn't dangerous. That we could do this and keep it simple. A movie, a walk, just two people stepping outside their usual lives for a moment. No one had to know. No one had to get hurt. But the truth is, I already knew. I knew it wouldn't stop there. Because when I said yes, when I let that moment stretch just a little longer than it should have, I felt it shift, something that had been unspoken between us suddenly solidifying, taking shape. And there was no coming back from it. The day we spent together felt surreal. Like stepping into a dream I hadn't realized I wanted to have. She wasn't just Graham's wife anymore. She was just her, raw, unfiltered, no longer confined by the role she had been assigned. It felt like I was meeting her for the first time, discovering the person beneath the carefully polished exterior. And what I found was someone unexpected, someone real. We lost ourselves in the simplicity of the day. No obligations, no expectations, just an unspoken agreement to exist in this bubble where nothing outside of it mattered. We went to a movie. One neither of us cared about, but we laughed at the ridiculous parts and whispered sarcastic comments under our breath like we were teenagers sneaking out past curfew. We ate greasy junk food, ignoring the calorie counts and the judgmental stares. We wandered through the park, stepping off the path, kicking at the leaves like kids with nowhere to be. And for the first time in years, maybe ever, I saw her carefree. Then, she took my hand. It was so small, so innocent. But it wasn't. Her fingers wrapped around mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe in that moment, it was. But beneath that touch, there was an undeniable weight. A choice. A boundary being tested, stretched, blurred. I knew what it meant, what it could lead to. There was a quiet invitation in the way her fingers lingered, an unspoken understanding passing between us. And I didn't pull away. Because the truth was, I wanted this. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. For weeks, I had been telling myself this was nothing, that we were just two people caught up in a moment. But standing there, feeling the warmth of her skin against mine, I knew that was a lie. I had wanted this from the second she stepped into my car. Maybe even before then. As the sun began to set, we found a quiet bench overlooking the city. The view was breathtaking, a skyline painted in hues of orange and pink, but I wasn't looking at that. I was looking at her. The way the fading light caught the edges of her hair, the way her lips parted slightly, like she was about to say something but hadn't quite figured out how. And then she whispered it. I think I made a mistake marrying Graham. The words hung in the air between us, heavy, irreversible. I should have said something, anything. But my throat was dry. My mind racing through every possible response and landing on none. This was the moment where everything could still be undone, where we could still pretend that this was just a day. Just a harmless escape. But then, she kissed me. It wasn't urgent, it wasn't desperate. It was soft, lingering just long enough to feel the weight of it, to understand what we were doing. It was a slow unraveling, a silent confession that neither of us had dared to speak aloud. Her lips were warm, hesitant at first, like she was giving me a chance to pull away. But I didn't. Because I wanted this. And in that moment, nothing else existed. Not Graham, not the consequences, not the inevitable fallout that would come crashing down around us. There was only this, the taste of her, the way her fingers tightened against my jacket, the soft sigh that escaped her lips as she leaned closer. It was reckless, selfish, and completely, utterly inevitable. Then it was over. She pulled back just slightly, her breath unsteady, her eyes searching mine for something, reassurance, regret, an answer neither of us had. And in that silence, reality crept back in. The city lights flickered in the distance, the weight of what we had just done pressing against my chest like a stone. But she didn't move away. Her fingers stayed where they were, her body still close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from her. There was something fragile in the way she lingered. Like she wasn't ready to let go of this moment yet. And I wasn't either. A gust of wind rolled through, and instinctively, I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her eyes fluttered closed at my touch, and when she opened them again, there was something raw in them. Something vulnerable. I don't want to go home, she murmured, so quiet I barely heard it. A battle raged inside me. Every logical part of me screamed to stop, to walk away before this spiraled further. But another part, the part that had been drawn to her from the beginning, wanted nothing more than to keep her here, to hold on to this feeling for just a little longer. I could feel her heart beating. Fast and unsteady, mirroring mine. And I knew this wasn't just about her marriage anymore. It was about us. About the line we had already crossed and the one we were dangerously close to stepping over completely. She exhaled softly, a breath that felt like surrender, and in that moment, I realized there was no going back. It was enough. Enough to ruin everything. And yet, not enough to stop what was coming next. I thought that was it. A mistake. A moment of weakness. Something fleeting, a brief collision of emotions that would fade as quickly as it had happened. We could pretend it never happened. Move on. Return to our separate lives before we set fire to everything we had built. But then, a week later, she showed up at my apartment. With suitcases. She stood there in the dim light of the hallway. Hair disheveled, face stripped of its usual poise. There was no trace of the carefully composed woman I had always seen in passing. Just her, bare, unguarded. And holding onto something she wasn't sure she could carry alone. I left him, she said. Just like that. No hesitation. No second thoughts. And suddenly, it wasn't just some harmless day out anymore. It was real. And it was dangerous. My heart pounded against my ribs as I tried to process what was happening. This was not how it was supposed to go. The guilt, the excitement. The what-ifs, they had all existed in this unspoken, intangible space where they could still be denied. But now, standing in front of me, suitcases at her feet. She had shattered the last illusion that we could walk away untouched. The air between us felt suffocating, thick with everything we had done and everything it had led to. My mind raced through the repercussions, Graham, my job, my entire life. Everything was on the line now, and yet, a part of me couldn't ignore the undeniable pull of her presence. I could see the way her hands trembled slightly at her sides, the way her shoulders carried the weight of a decision she had made with no way to undo it. She wasn't just here because she wanted to be. She was here because she had nowhere else to go. I wanted to ask her if she was sure, if she had thought it through. If she understood what she had just done. But deep down, I already knew the answer. The way she looked at me, like I was the only thing anchoring her in this moment, made it clear. She wasn't looking for a way back. She was looking for a way forward. A wave of conflicting emotions crashed over me. Fear. Desire. Responsibility. I knew that by letting her in, I was making a choice I couldn't take back. And yet, the idea of closing the door, of sending her away to figure this out alone, felt impossible. She exhaled sharply. Almost like she was bracing herself for rejection. And for a brief moment, I saw something I hadn't before: vulnerability. She had always been strong, composed. Someone who played the part expected of her. But right now, she was just a woman who had taken the most terrifying leap of her life, and she had no idea where she would land. My fingers tightened around the doorframe as I wrestled with the weight of it all. The world outside this apartment was still turning, oblivious to the storm brewing in its midst. But here, in this tiny space where everything had changed, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't turn her away. So I stepped aside. I went to work every day expecting to be fired. Expecting Graham to find out and destroy my entire life. Every time my phone buzzed or someone called my name, I braced myself for the moment of reckoning. I rehearsed excuses, denials. Even imagined the worst: security walking me out, whispered conversations as my colleagues watched me leave in disgrace. But it never came. Graham carried on as if nothing had changed. No shift in behavior, no flicker of suspicion. If he knew, he didn't show it. If he cared, he gave no indication. It was almost insulting. This was a man who built an empire on control. who prided himself on having a hand in everything around him. And yet, his wife, his beautiful, intelligent, incredible wife, had walked away, and he had simply let her go without a fight. That should have made me feel better. If he didn't care, then maybe we weren't in as much danger as I thought. Maybe I hadn't detonated a bomb that would blow up my entire world. But instead, it made me angry. He had her. He had this incredible woman, and he never even bothered to look at her long enough to see what he was losing. I had spent years in his shadow, watching him bark orders. Demand perfection, command respect. I had admired him, envied him, feared him. And now, all I felt was contempt. I couldn't keep working for him. Not because I was afraid. Not because I thought I'd slip up and expose everything, but because I couldn't stand to be around him. Couldn't stand to look at him and see the apathy. The complete lack of acknowledgement of what he had thrown away. Every meeting, every passing moment in the office, it gnawed at me, the thought that he had something I would have given anything for. And he didn't even care. So I quit. It wasn't a grand, dramatic exit. No confrontation, no heated words, no last-minute attempts to justify or explain myself. I simply walked into his office, handed in my resignation, and stood there while he skimmed the paper with barely an ounce of interest. "Any particular reason?" he asked, not even looking up. I could have told him. I could have let it all spill out, how he had failed her, how he didn't deserve her, how he had been so blind to what he had until it was too late. But I didn't. Because the truth was, it didn't matter. Not to him. "No," I said. "Just time for something new." And that was it. No fight. No drama. Just indifference. I walked out of that office lighter than I had in years. The weight of it, the secrecy, the tension, the suffocating need to look over my shoulder, was gone. But as I drove home, a new weight settled in. One that wasn't built on fear but on the unknown. What now? What did this mean for me, for her, for the fragile reality we had built together? When I stepped through the door that night, she was there. Standing in the kitchen. Bathed in the soft glow of the lights, looking at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. And in that moment, I knew, I had made the right choice. Whatever came next. Whatever chaos waited outside that door, it didn't matter. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't living for anyone else's expectations. I had chosen this. I had chosen her. And I wasn't looking back. We had no idea what we were doing. No grand plan. No perfect ending waiting just around the corner. Just the two of us, caught in something that felt bigger than logic. Stronger than reason. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, like standing at the edge of a cliff and knowing you were about to jump, but not caring if you had a parachute. For the first time in a long time, maybe ever, I wasn't afraid. I woke up each morning with a new kind of energy, not the dull obligation that had weighed me down for years, but something light. Something electric. The routine that had once defined my days, wake up, go to work, follow orders, come home, repeat, was gone. And in its place was uncertainty, unpredictability, freedom. The very thing I had feared most had become the thing I craved. I didn't know what the future held for us, and for the first time, I didn't need to. The idea of making plans, of structuring my life around stability, suddenly seemed laughable. We were figuring it out as we went, stumbling through the unknown with nothing but each other to hold on to. And somehow, that was enough. There were moments of doubt, of course. Moments when the weight of what we had done pressed in around us, whispering questions that had no easy answers. Could we really build something out of the wreckage we had left behind? Were we running towards something real, or just escaping from the past? But when I looked at her, those questions faded into the background. Because I saw the same fire in her that I felt in myself. The same need to keep moving forward, to not look back. Every night, we fell asleep in a space that no longer belonged to just me, but to us. And every morning, I woke up to the quiet certainty that this, whatever it was worth it. That no matter what happened, I had made the right choice. I wasn't trapped in routine anymore. I wasn't just existing. I was actually living. If you had told me a few months ago that I'd quit my job, leave behind everything safe and stable, and start a life with my boss's wife, I would have laughed in your face. But here I am. And it hasn't been easy. The weight of what we left behind still lingers in quiet moments. The uncertainty of what comes next is always there, just beneath the surface. Some nights, I wonder if the world will ever let us forget. But then I look at her. And I know the answer. I didn't just walk away from something safe, I walked toward something real. Some would call it reckless. Some would call it selfish. Maybe they're right. Maybe this will all come crashing down someday. But if life has taught me anything, it's that you don't get second chances at moments like these. And I wasn't about to let this one slip through my fingers. And honestly, I wouldn't change a damn thing. What do you think? Would you have made the same choice? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for the next one. Because trust me, this is only the beginning.